training program. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you've been having fun. We've been very pleased with everybody's presentations, and I know today you're gonna love this one. Ashley Cook, she's the park manager at Alligator Creek Preserve, Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center. If you've ever been there, it's on Burnstone Road. Growing up in Cape Coral, Florida, Ashley has always been a lover of all things nature. That love drove her to study environmental science and achieve a Bachelor of Science degree from Florida Southern College in Lakeland, Florida. Since then, she's traveled and worked on multiple continents, holding positions ranging from agroforestry specialist as a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal, West Africa, sea turtle conservation and wildlife sanctuary efforts in Costa Rica, and teaching English as a second language in Thailand. Returning home from these adventures, Ashley brought that love back to the beautiful state of Florida to serve as the park manager of Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center's Alligator Creek Preserve in Punta Gorda. She's currently leading a variety of conservation projects that focus on protecting, preserving, and restoring our unique Florida ecosystems and the creatures that inhabit them. I can't believe she's done all that, because she looks like she's about 12. Welcome, thank you so much, and give her, I would get a applause right now.
Well, thank you everyone, and thank you for the introduction. So, good morning. As she just said, I'm Ashley Cook. I'm the park manager of Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center's Alligator Creek Preserve, just down the road on Burnstone Road. So it's a pleasure to be speaking with you all today about our vertical oyster gardening initiative and how important oysters are in our environment. So before we get going, just by show of hands, how many people have heard of vertical oyster gardens before? All right. Yeah, I see some people who have actually attended our workshops before, so you might have a pretty good idea of some of this stuff. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit more about who we are. The Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center is a nonprofit organization that for the last 36 years has been dedicated to providing environmental education, recreation, and conservation. So we do this by a variety of different kinds of ways, providing film and lecture series and different kinds of programs and events throughout the year, all in hopes of engaging and informing our community about various environmental kind of topics. But the more that we were educating on a lot of these things, the more that we were realizing that we were talking about the challenges that they were facing, the struggles that they were having, the declines in their populations or their habitats. So the less and less we were able to just kind of sit back and educate about them or just speak on these kinds of topics, and the more that we wanted to get involved in the solution to some of these things and the hands-on conservation work that our area desperately needs. And so that's one of the reasons why we're here today. So this is where we start in the Charlotte Harbor Estuary, which I'm sure you guys are going to be pros at the end of this ambassador training with. Estuary, for a lot of people, is a new term. In fact, when we lead boat trips out of Fisherman's Village, we always ask our participants, what kind of body of water do you think that we're on right now? And a lot of people will say an ocean, or a sea, or a lake, or a pond, a river. And so estuary is usually a new term that they haven't heard before, which is really just a fancy term for a body of water where salt water and fresh water is mixing. So this is the Charlotte Harbor right here. We're getting our freshwater intake from the Niagara and Peace Rivers up here, and our salt water intake from the Gulf of Mexico. So because this is an area where salt and fresh water is mixing so well, it's very productive. So it's harboring, it's supporting a variety of plants, wildlife, and habitats in this kind of area. So this estuary, our Charlotte Harbor, is the second largest in the state, second to Tampa Bay. So this is a very productive system with over 270 square miles of open surface area. A little bit more about the importance of estuaries. Not only are they beautiful, but they're also providing nesting and breeding sites for numerous animal species, especially for a variety of birds. Our shorebirds, wading birds, and also migratory birds are coming down and utilizing those mangroves to build their nesting sites and to fledge their young. They're also protecting our coast from strong winds and storms. Anybody here through Hurricane Ian Yeah, lots of hands going up. So if you notice, around a lot of these areas where there's maybe more mangrove coverage, there's a lot less damage. So there's damage to the mangroves, but because they have those big canopies and those intertwined kind of root systems, that's helping to break up those winds and also those storm surges that comes from those kinds of storms. So keeping those mangroves in those areas is ultimately going to help protect us and also provide those important spaces for our wildlife as well. It's supporting commercial and recreational fisheries. I know that there's a bunch of fishermen in here. So the Charlotte Harbor is a really big fishing, it's like one of the fishing capitals of this area. So a lot of people will come here to fish a bunch of different kinds of sport fish, and anybody who also likes to eat seafood, this is where a lot of that seafood in this area is coming from. And it's a setting for popular recreational activities, and it contributes to our Florida aesthetic. So whether you were raised here or you transplanted here, these kinds of areas are just part of the Florida lifestyle. So regardless of what we're doing, whether it's eating or taking a walk or going kayaking, boating, fishing, it's part of the lifestyle of this kind of area, and it also helps to generate revenue for this area as well. So although it is beautiful and it's providing so many different kinds of benefits to our communities, the Charlotte Harbor is up against the odds. So I'm sure that you all have been learning about some of the water quality challenges that the Charlotte Harbor is currently facing. But just a brief list of some of the big heavy hitters right now: development and construction, dredging, water pollution, excess nutrients, increased boating activity and anchoring, overfishing and harvesting, and septic systems. So folks, this is just a brief list. The list goes on and it goes down, but a lot of these things are really contributing towards that degradation of the water quality right now. So when you think about it, there are things that we can do as residents to help mitigate some of these things in our day-to-day life, incorporating Florida-friendly landscaping in your own yard to help build those kinds of buffer gardens if you are located on the water, to help catch any of those kinds of chemicals or toxins that might be coming off of the road or from your own yard, knowing when to utilize fertilizers or to limit the use of fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides in your yards so it's not all seeping into the harbor. But when you think about the area around here, and you think about Charlotte Harbor kind of as the big pot in the middle, the things that are around it that you're going to see are, big developments, residential areas, highway systems, and all kinds of things that are seeping, trickling into the harbor. So when you mix that all up, it's definitely not something that you're going to want to eat, let alone live in. And so it's important for us as citizens to do the things that we can do to mitigate some of those things, but there's also something that naturally wants to help us clean and filter our water. And I'm sure that you may have guessed that hero is oysters. Now, does anybody know why oysters might be the superpower, the superhero that we're looking for?
Filter.
There we go. So oysters are incredible filter feeders. In fact, just one oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water in a day. So you can see how having more oysters in the water is going to help filter and clean that water and make it clearer as well. So you can see from here, what they're doing is pumping large volumes of water through their gills, and as the water is moving through, those particles that they want to eat are getting trapped in their mucus and then transported to their mouths to be eaten. So things like algae, nitrogen, contaminants, different kinds of plankton are all getting trapped in there. So they're removing all of those excess from the water, and then out comes clean water right here. Well, it's a very good observation. We'll get a little bit more into that too. So this is some of the benefits of an oyster reef habitat. So these are benthic creatures that are settling on the bottom of on the floor right here. So as I just mentioned, they're filtering massive amounts of water as they go through their days just by filter feeding. So this already, by just being out there, they are improving the water quality in those kinds of areas. They are also providing a higher increase in biodiversity. The more habitat is created by these oyster reefs, the more creatures are going to find it and want to settle down there. So there's starfish and crabs and shrimps and all kinds of fish that are going to kind of flock to these kinds of habitats. So because of that, the food sources for all of these creatures are also going to be increasing. So we have an increase in habitat and shelter, and coastal protection as well, because with the water being cleaner, the more mangroves and things like that that we're also going to have. So when you talk about oysters, you also have to consider the seagrasses as well, because with the oysters there and providing the cleaner and clearer water that makes the water a little bit more hospitable to things like seagrass, it's going to help stabilize that kind of vegetation and ultimately supporting the larger kinds of creatures that are in the harbor, like manatees and sea turtles. So the only thing on here that you see as a decrease is in toxic algal blooms. Now, algae blooms are a natural part of this kind of ecosystem, but when they get too in excess, they become toxic. So having all of these creatures working together in that kind of balance in this ecosystem with cleaner and clearer water, that's going to help reduce those toxic algal blooms. So with all of these benefits of an oyster reef habitat and all of the things that they can provide to this type of ecosystem, why are we still seeing such a problem with the water quality? And that is because oyster populations are at historic lows. In fact, we have lost over 90% of our oyster population. 90%. That is just an unfathomable number, and it's one of the worst extinction rates that we are seeing here in our state. So this is due to everything else that is contributing towards the degradation of the Charlotte Harbor, but especially the low salinity and oxygen levels. Even though things are underwater, they do still have to have oxygen. An overload of silt, waste, toxins, and excess nutrients. And that's what I was referring back to when you think about the development of the residential areas, the roadways, even the septic systems and things like that that are seeping every day into the harbor. Now, all of that waste and toxins, the oysters do remove them by filter feeding, but the more of those materials that are in excess, the more that they are going to have to work to filter, the more that they are going to have to filter, so the more exhausted they're going to become. So that makes them more likely to be preyed upon and for disease to spread on those kinds of reefs as well. So increased sedimentation reduces those nutrients for oysters, and silt is covering the hard structures that they need for settlement. And so this is a really big one. So it's important to know that juvenile oysters, just kind of fresh out into the world, are actually free swimming. So they're not attached to anything yet, but they're looking for something to attach to naturally. They're looking for the backs of other oysters to climb and settle down. But with a 90% decrease in the oyster population, those kind of places are few and far in between. And so the silt that is also in excess is covering up the rest of the little bit of hard structures that they're still looking for. So that is one of the things that is really, hindering the oyster populations. There's not that many to find, and the ones that they are found are being covered up by, these kinds of excess materials. And so this is how we want to help, by creating vertical oyster gardens. So first of all, what is a vertical oyster garden, also known as a bog? Vertical oyster gardens are composed of recycled oyster shells and natural material rope. So all of our shells come from local restaurants, and we are using a natural material coconut rope so as to not put anything harmful or unnatural back into the water. So by stacking these up like this, you might think, what is the benefit of stacking a bunch of shells on a rope? Well, it's a good question. But stacking them up like that is actually creating the perfect condominium for these juvenile oysters to find and to settle on so that they can grow and filter water. So we're just giving them a little bit of a push by supplementing their habitat and providing these areas around the community. So this is an image of juvenile oysters. So these little bitty things, that's oyster spat. So you can see how tiny they are. And this is after they have already attached. So we have actually counted, and in this picture there's over 40
spat that is on just this one shell. So no, 40 oysters won't completely develop to adulthood on just one shell. They will outcompete each other for space and for nutrients. But the ones that do survive, they'll keep kind of growing in that jagged kind of way that oysters do. So here is a glimpse at our table to reef journey. It starts at the table where we are collecting oyster shells from local restaurants in the area. So all of the shells that we use for this program were once on somebody else's dinner plate. So instead of going to a landfill or into the dumpster, these shells are very important to us and very crucial, and we collect them and we take them to be quarantined. So we are partnered with the city of Punta Gorda to store these oyster shells at their water treatment facility. So we have big tarps out there. The oyster shells have a beautiful view of cows and pasture land. So they bake out there for several months. And so that is for the sun to naturally kill off any kind of lingering bacteria that might be hanging around from the restaurant process or transportation. So after several months, we recollect them. We have really dedicated volunteers who come and drill thousands of holes in these oyster shells to be ready for workshops. So then we have kind of been going on tour to all different kinds of residential areas, specifically the ones that are located on the waters and have docks that are able to, kind of harbor these bogs. So we lead educational workshops about water quality and the superpower of oysters. So then our participants will create their vertical oyster gardens and deploy off their dock in hopes of colonizing that oyster spat. So usually this project has been done in other areas of Florida, and this is kind of where it has ended. So we are wanting to take this project a step further by recollecting these bogs when we are partnered with the Charlotte Harbor State Park Preserve to add these vertical oyster gardens onto an existing oyster reef within Charlotte Harbor to almost immediately increase biodiversity, habitat and shelter, and more habitat for these juvenile oysters to find, to settle, and to colonize on. So we will be going out there the first or second week of May and creating this larger oyster reef. So it's coming up soon. We're very excited about it. So we'll then be going out and observing and monitoring the new growth over time, doing biological assessments to see if there's more seagrass in the area over time, there's more fish, if there's more invertebrates and things like that, to really see how well this program went over.
Actually, what's the time cycle of that process? We put the vertical oyster garden in until you're monitoring,
So it completely depends on which workshop or which residential area you've been in. So these workshops have been going on since fall last year, and the last one will be in March. So the time period kind of ranges depending on which workshop you've been to and what residential area you're in. So we aren't sure how much is going to colonize on these bogs over that short period of time, but the thing that we're really focused on is incorporating the community in something and giving them the opportunity to also have a hands-on, experience in creating something that will help, the water quality within Charlotte Harbor. So the important thing to consider is that right when we're out planting these vertical oyster gardens onto that reef is right when they're going to be really spawning and breeding. So hopefully it'll be, the perfect place for all of those new, oysters to find. And so that's something we're going to be monitoring as time goes on.
Oyster orgy.
So as if that wasn't enough to want to support these little guys, oysters are actually considered a keystone species. So a keystone species is something that can be considered like the glue of that kind of ecosystem that is holding it together, and that without, it can fall apart or become imbalanced. So as a keystone species, oysters are supporting over 300 other species. So by us supporting the oyster population, yes, we're gonna get cleaner water, but 300 other species will also benefit from that added oyster in there. So these are just some of the Florida favorites, some stone crabs, blue crabs, striped bass, and black drum, and snowy egrets, and conchs, and things like that. So this is providing crucial habitat for all of these creatures. Unfortunately, I can't fit 300 of them on one slide, but think of an organism that lives out in the harbor and it's most likely a benefit from the oyster population. So I love this picture, and it's just something that reminds me of what our ecosystem should be. So we have a massive oyster reef in the forefront here. We have some grasses and some mangroves in the back, and we have fishermen that are coming to, benefit from its bounty. So, the more that we protect these kinds of ecosystems, the more that they are going to, benefit us as well. So our community, with the help of some very powerful oysters, can help protect, preserve, and restore our Florida paradise. Ready to get stacking? Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Once you create the vertical reef and you hang it off your dock, do you need to seed it with, you need to get baby oysters to help seed, or will it just happen naturally?
So this is a natural kind of process. Definitely an interesting thought for the future. But these different kinds of areas where they might be hanging, whether it's PGI or BSI or Pirate Harbor, or the multitude of areas where they're hanging right now. If the oysters are in those areas, which we know that they are because they're growing on, the seawalls and the pilings and things like that, it's supplemental habitat for them. So in case they come swimming through, they have something there that they can find, and that is there for them. So something that usually comes up is, oh, well, there's oysters on the seawall or on my boat, and they're kind of a pain. So for the people that are shucking their oysters off, or they don't want them and their own kind of property or their own kind of things, this also helps that by giving them that their own kind of separate, special little area that's not going to hinder your boat or your kayak or getting access off or in your dock.
You mentioned 90% reduction. Like, how many acres, do you know? Like, how far apart?
That's a really good question. I don't know acreage specifically, but that would be really interesting to
Yeah,
find out.
just to give scale of magnitude, right? I mean, is it 100 acres? Houses?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, and so that data, that 90% data point is from 2012. So I haven't been able to find anything more recent than that, and so this is all kind of springing from, the CHEC study that was done back in 2012. So you can imagine how much has happened during that period of time, and how much more, it has started to decrease. So it's just another one of those things that more research has to be done in these kinds of areas, but it's something absolutely necessary to do.
Well, who's responsible for performing those studies? Do they have a regular, 10-year cycle, or there is no agency monitoring?
So that's the thing. In this area, we are very lucky that we have so many, wonderful organizations that are focused on water quality, but those things also are contingent on funding and staffing and things like that. So I know that we've had people attend our workshops that say, oh, well, back in the day, I was part of, building X, Y, and Z oyster reefs in these locations. Like, what happened to them? So I think different agencies are doing their own thing, and right now, people are trying to really advocate for, the establishment of new reefs. So this for us is just a first year program, but the next step of this program is to actually establish an entire new reef. So we're piggybacking because of permitting process, and that's another thing, is that everything to do with the water or the bottom of the seafloor has to go through like Army Corps of Engineers, and the permitting process is kind of like this. So to immediately do something, we are partnered with Sanibel Cativo Conservation Foundation to, they are the permit holders for this reef, so they're allowing us, along with the State Aquatic Preserve, to put these onto there. So without their permits, this would have taken a lot more time to be able to establish. But that's what we're working on now, is we'll build back up this reef, and we'll plan to build a new one in the future. So that is something that we personally are working on.
Do you need a permit to hang something like this from your dock?
You do not need permits to hang these from your docks, but we do need a permit from FWC to recollect them from your docks because it will have wild life on them when you collect them. So whether it's barnacles or oysters or invertebrates or whatever, the transportation of moving actual live wildlife does require a permit, but just hanging them off of your docks does not.
So why do you come and collect them?
So we're collecting them this go around to create a larger reef within Charlotte Harbor. So there's one out there, if anybody's familiar with Cormorant Key, it was an oyster reef that was, established, and after Hurricane Idalia, it was kind of actually flattened. So it lost a lot of its height and again, fell to, silt and sedimentation and things like that. So we're thinking that with these vertical oyster gardens, they're on this natural coconut rope, which has been improved as natural material to place on to within the aquatic preserve. So hopefully that will provide a little bit more stabilization so that it's able to withstand those, winds and those storm surges that might come through and would otherwise kind of flatten it out.
Do you know if you've done anything with Little Gasparilla Island? If I live on that island, I'd be super happy to organize, or I know a lot of the islanders would love to be a part of this, and we all have docks, so is that something that is a possibility?
Absolutely. So we want these everywhere possible that they can be. This isn't something where we are always going to be recollecting them for, but right now our focus is to create a larger natural habitat for the oysters because that is, genuinely what they need. So then after that, we are looking to replace all of our participants' bogs so that they can either hang there or establish a whole new reef. So any kind of residential area, any group or organization that is interested in participating in these kinds of things, we do have public workshops that we provide, and we also do private ones. If you go on our website, you can request a workshop for your community, your organization. So yeah, we'd be more than happy to. And with that being said, not every community is going to be a perfect fit for them to be really collected. For example, we did one over at Charlotte Park, and I'm not sure if you guys have learned about it a little bit yet, but Charlotte Park is a very kind of polluted area. They have a lot of water quality issues that are going on right now. They're also on, septic systems. So we did a workshop for them. We'll be doing another one because obviously it's important to be able to help them initiate the cleaner water kind of deal. But we're not going to be recollecting their stacks because we don't want to add any kind of contaminant back into the harbor. So there are some where we're just leaving in place, or they might be too far to go out on boats to recollect and things like that. But absolutely, if you're interested, definitely go on our website and pick up them.
So if you didn't have your own dock, where would you recommend hanging these if you wanted? I mean, like
Yeah.
Charlotte Park, it obviously not a good place, but where would you go?
Charlotte Park would be a good place to put and just to leave.
I wanna eat 'em.
And that's something else that comes up a lot of the time is like, oh, I love to eat oysters, and then after they hear, some of the things that we're talking about, they're like, should I be eating oysters? And so that's also why it's really important to know where your seafood is coming from. There's something called, I think, Seafood Watch that tells you like where, your food is coming from. Because if you are getting oysters that are coming from Charlotte Harbor, yeah, you might want to reconsider eating them. I mean, because it's just like we were talking about, all of those pollutants and, they're getting trapped in there. And then they're harvested straight from the water, and especially if you're eating them raw, there's all kinds of viruses and bacteria. Multiple people have actually died from eating contaminated oysters. So know where your seafood is from, and if you love to eat oysters, check where they come from.
Yeah, actually, how is it determined where these oyster beds will be created in the future? I mean, I've seen apps, fishing apps and stuff. I mean, personally, I think they should be wherever I go fishing. How is it determined where they're located?
So how we're going to determine ours is that same study that CHEC did back in 2012. they listed, you know, a whole table of potential locations that would be suitable to create new oyster reef habitats and why. So we're going back, working with Melinda Brown from the FDEP to go out to those places and reevaluate them and, you know, do surveys on them to make sure that they still are, because that's a big time period. So with different kinds of developments and dredging activities and things like that, like all of that has to be considered. So it is something that the Army Corps of Engineers will have to be involved with. It's something that the state will have to be a part of. FWC, I mean, lots of different kind of entities will have to become involved in something like that. But there are already a list of potential areas that are being considered.
So I'm assuming to participate in this program, you have to go through one of the workshops first?
So you're at a workshop right now.
No, okay, so how do we, I mean, if we wanted to participate, what do we do next?
So right after this, we're going to be going outside and you guys will actually be able to create your own vertical oyster garden. So if you are sitting there thinking like, I don't have a dock, or I might not have the best place for it, but you know somebody that does, you have a friend or family member or somebody like that that you know would allow you to hang them off their dock, then that's something to also consider. If you want to make one and leave it for us to take to another participant, you can do that as well. But as long as you're on some kind of water, it gets put on some kind of water, it's going to be beneficial somewhere. So
Any more than one off a dock?
You want mine?
yes, so we'll just be creating one per person today, but we have had several hung off docks. So we actually just got permission from the city of Punta Gorda to place these on their public parks. So Lashley and Ponce de Leon and Gilcrest Park will have multiple of these permanently displayed in those areas, so that it also aids as a an educational and informative awareness kind of tool, so that people that are going for a walk on these parks or going fishing or doing whatever, they'll be able to see that and be like, oh, what's that? And hopefully it piques their interest and they either learn something that day or they come to one of our workshops and gets involved. So for those larger kinds of docks, yeah, more than one is definitely doable.
How long are these strings of oyster shells?
So we provide 5 feet of rope. So that is completely because everybody's dock is different and unique. So people are gonna need a different, length of rope depending on the water and their dock. So you get 5 feet and we make them with about 20 shells on it. So I would say it's, about maybe 2 feet of shell once they're on there.
If they hit the, like this morning, I went out to my dock, got in my boat, come across the bay, and extreme low tides, there was only like this much water in my dock, where sometimes the dock can be underwater. So would you just hang it so that it's kind of level with the other oysters that are on the pilings?
Yes, so we also have, because you have attended this workshop today, you guys will all be getting oyster restoration contributor totes that have information about who we are in Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center, how to install your vertical oyster garden, and it's also gonna have ice screws and flagging tape and everything that you're gonna need. There we go. Everything that you're gonna need to hang your vertical oyster garden is going to be in here. So, but you brought up a really good point, and that's something that I mentioned in that installation guide, is that if you see oysters that are already growing on your pilings or things like that, that's going to be a perfect indicator on where to place this, the depth that you're gonna wanna put it on. So things to consider is that you don't want them on the bottom of the floor, because what we've talked about, that silt and sedimentation that can overcome those shells, then it'll become counterproductive. So you wanna make sure that it has, as much water flow that can come through it, not on the bottom. But if you get those low tides, that low water, these are intertidal creatures, so they can be out of the water. For our program, we're recommending to have them fully submerged as much as possible, not to hang them too high to where they would not be able to, be in water most of the time. But yeah, it's completely dependent on your dock. If you do have really low water and, you know, only half of it is submerged, then you're most likely gonna have things that are, you know, colonizing on the lower half of your stack, but definitely still, you know, viable.
Can you pull that sheet out that's in there that shows about collecting them and kind of explain, especially if they're taking you to somebody that has a dock and they don't, and explain how that should be filled out and.
Yes, so it's actually back there, I'll grab it. If anybody else, does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, so in my dock, we have pretty much mussels and barnacles and grasses. Then 200 feet biotone goes into oysters, which maximize its own Charlotte Beach. So my question is, if there's something limiting the oysters in our canal, freshwater, or something.
Yep.
Is there any chance that oysters are gonna grow there and you don't see them on the pilings or on the dock?
Yeah, so there's always a chance that they could come. Maybe they're not coming because if you said there's mussels and barnacles and other things like that, they could be getting over competed or out competed in those kinds of areas, but it's definitely still possible. So it's just kind of like how, you know, we look for other humans, birds look for other birds. Oysters are gonna look for other oysters. So if you happen to get a juvenile oyster that's swimming through there just by chance, looking for other oysters, you know, that's going to be the perfect place for them. So, you know, it's gonna feel awesome when he comes through. It's like, oh yeah, more oysters for me. So they'll be able to join. So it's definitely worth a shot. And I know you mentioned something about the mussels before. When we are recollecting these, we will be doing biological assessments of them to make sure that there are no mussels or any other kinds of, you know, potential contaminants, because this is going into an aquatic preserve. So it is important for us to make sure that we're not adding anything harmful to these reefs, and it's only going to be beneficial.
So the mussels are detrimental to the oyster reefs?
The mussels are invasive, so they're not just to the oyster reefs, but just to the ecosystem, kind of in general, yeah. That's my question.
Are you working with Charlotte County schools? Have you done workshops with classes?
So we haven't done workshops with the school systems yet, but as I just mentioned, we just got approved to do the public ones in the city of Punta Gorda parks. So we're partnering with the Punta Gorda Middle School for them to make the permanent ones so that we can deploy them out there. So that's just one of the ways that we're looking to incorporate the schools. But we provide free field trips to every 2nd and 4th grader in the Charlotte County school system. So when we go to these parks, and actually our 2nd grade field trips are at Ponce de Leon Park. So we'll be able to, you know, show them the vertical oyster gardens there, and it'll be a really great, you know, educational topic to share with them there. But any way that we can get involved, you know, further with the schools and those kinds of things, we're definitely, you know, open to it for sure. Yeah.
How long and how far can a free swimming juvenile range?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure how far they will range, but you're looking at about, you know, 30 days from where they're, you know, they're hatched and they're free swimming. That phase is about 30 days where they're, you know, they haven't developed their foot yet. That's gonna help them, you know, try to find the rest of the place they're looking for.
And at that point, are they mostly influenced by the tide?
I'm sorry?
Are they mostly influenced by the tide as to where they go?
Yeah, so they can swim. So I think the tides would definitely have, you know, they would definitely play a part in that for sure. What's that?
Google says 1 kilometer.
1 kilometer it says that they can travel during that time. So if you're something that's this big, I mean, we all saw how tiny that was. That's a long way for that little thing to go. The tide would for sure help, like any kind of, you know, free swimming thing or platonic thing. They're gonna be, you know, definitely influenced by the tide. So maybe that kilometer could, you know, become a little bit more with some flow of water. But it's definitely interesting to consider. Yep.
2 questions. The barnacles perform a similar function to oysters, And there's an area just a little south of Alligator Creek in the harbor with some new markers put up maybe 4 or 5 months ago. Is that something that CHEC is involved in?
No, that's not something that we're involved in. I'm not sure if anybody else knows, but does anybody have a little bit more information about barnacles specifically? I'm not too familiar with what barnacles are actually doing. That's an interesting question, but I'm not sure if they are.
My selection is larger and barnacles than it is in oyster, so
They're even bigger.
most of that, not the oysters are more the carnivores and whatever they can fit for you in terms now. So, yeah.
Can you repeat what he said?
Wow.
So-
I'm sorry, yeah.
Stand
It's
up.
they are partitioning their environment based on the food niche, okay? And it's largely, fecal debris, organics, and bacteria, anything within their size range. With the barnacles are capturing larger stuff. Just look at their feeding mechanism. One has legs with cilia, with flagella, CD on it, okay, and the other one is taking mucus and trapping stuff with cilia. Does that make any sense?
So are they filter feeding?
They're both filter feeding, but
Okay.
they're selecting different sizes,
Okay. Gotcha.
okay?
So different
Those are
kinds of
called a food niche,
things.
yeah, feeding niche.
Yeah, it's actually, it's not really a question, but this is what I wanted everybody to understand. What you're talking about your program, why this is so exciting. Look at the enthusiasm and the questions today.
Yeah.
Coastal Conservation Association, in conjunction with FWC and FDEP, has dumped hundreds of tons of shells out in the harbor to try and get reefs going, and nobody knew about it.
Right.
And it happens, and that's great. But this is sustainable grassroots enthusiasm, to you guys.
Thank you, Bruce.
Here's a question regarding the signage out, it's on the east wall, relatively new.
Yeah.
It has to do with oysters, and there's, let's say, like, this is an oyster, yada, yada, go away, leave it alone.
That's where the PVC tubes are set up.
Oh, they are
Yeah,
PVC.
Yeah, the
four.
PVC tubes, you just
About
stay
a
out of there.
mile
That's
apart.
that's oyster traps, and that's an oyster bed that has been established. And they want you out of there. No propping, going through there with your props.
Okay, but who's doing it?
Is that a commercial event?
No, that's FDEP, and it is a preserve. It is not allowed to be touched or harvested.
All right. And you can't fish there, even though there's trout all around it. You don't want to go in
I
there.
didn't know that.
Oh, the humanity.
But if we get more
Fishing
oyster
tonight.
beds, then, more trout will be out there. It's all connected, you know what I mean?
You know me, Bruce, I couldn't catch COVID in Wuhan.
Is there any, harvesting allowed in Charlotte Harbor? Are they protected?
I don't know if they harvest, with out of the preserve, but inside the preserve, you can't harvest those.
Because
Those
Charlotte
oysters,
Harbor
but-
General, if they start coming back and there's no protection.
Yeah, and that's another thing, like once you establish something, it's important to make sure it's protected. So we will be going out to those areas
He'll eat 'em all.
and yeah, he'll eat them all and protected, but we have gotten calls at the environmental center before from people that are seeing oyster reefs being harvested out in Charlotte Harbor, and they're like, is this allowed? And so, that's good that we have a concerned citizen, so they called the authorities, and whatever was going on out there, was hopefully taken care of. But out in the harbor itself, outside of the aquatic preserve, I'm not sure if there's like a season or if you have to have a permit for it, but like every single thing that we do requires a permit. So I would be, very shocked if it didn't require some kind of license or, had some kind of season, but I would also be shocked if there was enough out there for people to go and actually harvest, in general, so.
Are there any commercial oyster farms being developed here?
Commercial?
Like where I'm from, they have them in our harbor.
they're floating devices, they look like, kinda like floating pallets.
Yeah.
That they, I mean acres worth of commercial
Yeah.
oyster farming.
So I know that they do that up in like Cedar Key, or they
This
were
is New
doing
England,
it.
yeah.
So they do it in other areas of Florida, but I don't think anything like that is happening
Would they
right now.
allow it?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question, but I think, you know, it's more important for us to restore those populations, for them to stay in that kind of ecosystem to help build it back up. I am not sure it would be beneficial to farm them, you know, for consumption, with the water quality being the way that it is. You know, you would most likely be looking to farm them and have them have, you know, pretty high level of contaminants in them. So you gotta clean the water first, and then it's, you know, the possibilities are endless with what you can do from there, and especially the fishing. You know, a lot of fishermen, you know, get involved in these conversations about these oysters, and a lot of them are really for it, because it's like, well, do you like to fish? You know, well, we need more seagrass beds, we can have more, you know, invertebrates, we can have more fish, like everything in that kind of ecosystem is totally connected. So that's why we have to make sure it's taken care of. Yep.
Okay, oysters. Minimum size limit to harvest in the state of Florida recreationally, 3 inches. And there are closed seasons in the month of June, July, and August. Some extent to September. The only place that has a complete closure is Apalachicola Bay. Daily recreational bag limit, 2 bags per harvester. And then it goes through, tells you the hours that you can do it, and that it's all controlled by the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And it mentions some estuarian habitat restoration project zones that are closed, but it does not say, this is the fishing regulations, does not say Charlotte Harbor is closed.
Do you need a permit to?
You have to have a fishing license to harvest, but this is recreational. I don't know, this does not talk about commercial whatsoever.
And FWC does have an oyster map, all of the mapped out oyster beds are continuously monitored for water quality, because we do have neurotoxins and stuff like that in our water that do, because they are filter feeders, do then go into these oysters. And so they're constantly monitoring for these types of things to make sure that nobody's harvesting from those beds, so that you don't potentially get sick. So FWC does have a map, and it will tell you if specific beds are closed because of those reasons.
Yeah. There are people trying to do what they can, and in fact, at one of our last workshops, we met a man who actually tags the oysters out here to monitor the harvesting, illegal harvesting, so that they can track them down. So people that don't know that, you know, these oysters have these trackers on them, you know, will take them and do whatever it is that they're gonna do, whether it's sell them or eat them themselves or whatever. But he's developed these trackers onto these oysters, which is fascinating to me. They do the same thing with mosquitoes to like monitor malaria. So it's really cool, you know, what they're doing, but there are people out there that are trying to, you know, be innovative to do whatever it is that they can. So I can't speak for all of the reefs, unfortunately, out in Charlotte Harbor, but the ones that we are associated with and will eventually establish, like, better stay away. We'll make sure that they are, you know, definitely looked after.
Are clams also considered good filter feeders?
Yes, clams are also, you know, really great filter feeders. And I do know that there is another organization that is working on clam restoration right now as well, and trying to develop like a living shoreline. So yeah, oysters aren't the only ones, but they're definitely one of the big ones, but for sure clams as well.
I know that we talked that first section about water quality, that sort of thing. What are they doing to improve water quality? I mean, to prevent like runoff from, you know, yards and also from septic tanks and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the whole water quality issue, a lot of it is starting with education. So if people are more aware and know of the kinds of effects that just the things that they are putting in their own yards, or, you know, dealing with on a day-to-day basis, you know, if people are realizing the effects that it has, that's where it starts. You know, for people that are just, you know, going and fertilizing their yard so it's nice and green, or, you know, overwatering, or, you know, staying on their septic system, you know, there's all kinds of things that we could be doing, but it starts with knowing what you should be doing first. So there are other things like UFIFIS, they have a Florida-friendly landscaping program that teaches people all about how to start in your yard to have Florida native plants and have like buffer gardens if you water on the water to help mitigate some of those chemicals and toxins. So especially in this area, I mean, almost everybody is close or near to some kind of body of water. I mean, it's not just the harbor, it's about the stormwater ponds and everything else in between. So it really starts with us, and so there's a lot of really wonderful organizations. I mean, you're attending the Charlotte Harbor Ambassador training right now because it's something that Healer Harbor is doing to help educate, you know, this community about it. So, yeah.
Hi. Let me just reinforce what Ashley done. First off, my name's Dave Abderhol, and I'm the current president of the board for the Charlotte Harbor Environmental Center. Yeah, that's too much oyster dust. The oyster, we call them the oyster bars, are set no alcohol. You got to bring your own Tabasco sauce. They're set up and you'll move out there. But what I'd like to say, two things. One, I'm so proud of her.
Yeah.
This is what, you know, I have a joke that I say, and I guarantee it'll get laughs looking at the room. I consider her a daughter. I mean, I've helped mentor her a little, and I'm so proud of her, and she's just a wonderful young lady. But I consider her a daughter. Problem is, she considers me her grandfather. It always works. But yeah, this is Ashley's program. I'm honored to be part of it. But my second point is, I sit on the City of Punta Gorda's Utility Advisory Board, and believe me, septic to sewer is huge. I mean, she talked about Charlotte Park. I mean, I'm not against those people. They bought their house, septic was what they used. You go up Northport before all the expansion, it was virtually 100% septic. But it's not those people's fault. But now we've learned and we're doing the corrections. I know we've gotten a large government grant, and they're continuing to look for grants to go septic to sewer. But then you go, okay, the city puts the lines in, but then we have to hook up, and the numbers that they're quoting are astronomical. You know, $50,000 to hook up. I'm like, my God, I'm gonna go buy pipe. You know, I remember when we did ours, I grew up outside Philadelphia. I went away to school. I went to Penn State. Okay, never mind. And I had a canoe, a really nice, an old smoker, a big aluminum canoe that would go. I went up, come home. Dad, where's my canoe? He traded it to the plumber to do the hookup. So I lost my canoe, and he goes, well, you go in there and flush, you're paying for it. So what do you think, $500? Now they're talking $50,000. How does a homeowner do it? So we're talking about, we gotta look for other grants, you know, to help homeowners, because if you leave it, you know, on people, fixed income, whatever, $50,000 is a lot of money. But there are programs, and I'm pretty proud that the city, you know, we're kind of small, you know, we're not that big of a place, but they've got an RO plant. As Ashley told you, they've been cooperative, letting us quarantine oysters out there, but they're being very active to help with the septic to sewer. And I know Charlotte County as a whole is doing really good. So that's most I just wanted to thank Ashley.
Can I ask you a question to follow up on oyster harvesting? You know, you have at least three agencies here. You have the Fish and Wildlife Commission, but you also have the Department of Health and the Environmental Protection. And we noticed that the Environmental Protection had called this for shellfish non-attainment. An awful lot of the drainage in some parts of the harbor. So just because they have our seasons open, harvesting doesn't necessarily mean you should be eating raw oysters. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about what kind of regulations. These oysters are, they're very well adapted for, eating bacteria and viruses. Things like that.
What is the designated use for Charlotte Harbor? You mentioned 4 of them on day 1. There was shellfish, potable water, marine fish, and freshwater fish. Which one is Charlotte Harbor?
Well, no, there could be a lot of, Brandon talked about those 4. But there can be, like, where I'm from, Grand Calumet was a non-payment well. It goes to plankton and fisheries and so forth. So we have fishing, right? And shellfish.
Yeah, I can't hear, I'm sorry.
And first, yeah, I'm sorry. So you have primary contact, which is swimming, bathing, things like that, surfing. And you have fishing, and you have drinking, highest.
Right.
Don't ask questions for the rest of our lives.
I understand that, but I was just wondering, what is the designated use for Charlotte Harbor, which would dictate what threshold values for
Right.
nutrients and things are coming?
Which ones they're not in payment for? I think it's nutrients.
But what is Charlotte Harbor's designated use? Is it the highest designated use?
The highest designated would be for drinking water.
Okay, so it's held accountable to drinking water
Yes.
standards.
Right.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Thank you.
Most specifically, okay, most specifically, it's nitrogen.
Okay. So drinking water levels for nitrogen?
No, drinking water is controlled generally by bacteria. And
Maybe I'm not articulating it correctly. I'm trying to understand. So Charlotte Harbor is on the impaired list based on, various different parameters that are being measured. What is the standard? Is it drinking water standard? Is it shellfish standard? Is it marine fish standard? Is it?
I think I can help you there. So it's an impaired ecosystem or an impaired water because of like the habitat, like the ecosystem. So yeah, it's not, so you can't ever drink harbor water.
Right.
So it's not gonna be from a drinking water standpoint, but it's gonna be from like the decline that they're seeing, what the level of contaminants is based on what that kind of habitat should be operating at. So that's, does that help a little bit?
To me, it's a simple question. What is the highest designated use of Charlotte Harbor?
Would that be bathing?
you mean the highest priority?
It's fishing.
I'm not
You're going
sure
back
there
to
is
Moody's.
one.
So Brandon Moody's presentation was from Florida Department of Environmental
Right.
Protection
That's
standpoint
from there.
for what their standards are. And
Right.
those 4 categories that he talked about is how the FDEP breaks those apart, because it is not shellfish harvesting. There's certain points of the harbor that would be held to shellfish accountability, but that's just gonna be fish, because we don't drink from that. That's not our drinking water, that's not potable water. So it really isn't held to a high standard as far as tracking and reporting the nutrients like Brandon was talking about. But that doesn't mean it's not important, as we all know.
So like for drinking water, E. coli is 0.
That's not what she's
right?
asking.
Can't have any E. coli in your drinking water.
Well,
But it's allowed
I don't
for
wanna
swimming.
beat this to death, but if we're gonna be ambassadors going out there saying that Charlotte Harbor is impaired, I would like to be more knowledgeable on what that assessment is based on. Is it based on, what set of measurement criteria, which changes depending on the designated use of that?
No, not really. It's based on the quality of the water, period. The
Okay.
quality of the water, there are standards set for the water that if the water exceeds a certain level, a lot of things start to suffer. The seagrass starts to suffer. the invertebrates start to suffer, the bony fishes start to suffer, the mammals start to suffer. We suffer just breathing the air along. I was walking along the harbor yesterday by the new hotel and looking for horseshoe crabs. My lungs burned for about 2.5 hours afterwards because the blue-green algae is about 8 inches thick along the shore there, sludge. So those are the things that the water is based on, what's in that water then because of all that algae. It's not triggered because, you can't take a drink today.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
It's the profile of the water overall, and then it cascades down all the things it affects.
Okay, I got it.
It's kind of like the air,
yeah.
when they say, the air is bad to breathe today, it's
Yeah.
because there's so much
It's
of
great
this.
that we have so many questions and we can bring them up later.
Yes.
Ashley needs to, start the excitement
Yes.
of building some vertical oyster gardens or bogs, as the people in the know call.
Okay, guys.
Remember.
We're about to get started. The paper that I just passed around, this is the most important sheet. So this has all of the contact information and the location of wherever the vertical oyster garden will be placed so that we can